Number 20, let's keep in mind that the part that's underneath the square root cannot be negative. So that means it can be negative. That means 6n has to be greater than or equal to 0. So if our solution is going to actually be a solution, 6n has to be greater than 0. So if we divide by 6, that means n has to be greater than 0. As long as n is more than 0, everything's fine. So our first step towards solving is to square both sides. We get 6n on the left is equal to n squared on the right. There's a couple ways that you could solve this. You may be thinking, like, let's divide by n, and that's perfectly fine, although you may lose a 0 as a solution. So here's what I would do. I would move everything to one side, and then I'm going to take out a greatest common factor of n, and I end up with this. When is n going to be equal to 0, or n times n minus 6 going to be equal to 0? And that happens at 2 points. It happens if n equals 0, and it happens if n minus 6 is equal to 0. We add 6 to both sides. So it happens when n equals 6 or if n equals 0. And let's try both of those things up here. Can I have that, please? So if I plug in a 0 for both n's, then I get the square root of 0 is equal to 0. And that's true. So 0 is a solution. And if I plug in 6 for this n and 6 for this n, then I get 6 times 6 is 36. So I get the square root of 36 is equal to 6. And that's also true. So 6 is a solution. Both of those are greater than or equal to 0. And so they both work. Now, let's try number 21. We have some criteria for our solutions. First of all, everything underneath the square root itself has to be positive. So 1 minus n has to be greater than or equal to 0. If you subtract 1 from both sides, you get this. If you divide by -1, you have to flip the inequality sign, and you get n needs to be less than or equal to 1. So if we get n equals 2, no bueno. We're going to try the same thing here with this. -7 minus 2n has to also be greater than or equal to 0. -2n has to be greater than or equal to 7. We divide by -2 and flip the inequality sign, and we get n has to be less than or equal to -7/2. And that is -3.5. So if it's less than -3.5, it's definitely less than 1. So we don't really have to worry about that one. We have to worry about this one. All right, now we're ready to do some solving. Square both sides. Cool things happen. You end up with that. Now we need to get all our n's to one side. So I would add 2n because I like my variables to be positive. Just a positive person like that. At the same time, oh, how cool. Just kidding. Okay. I would also subtract 1, get rid of that, get rid of that. I would get n is equal to -1 minus 1 is -8. Okay, so is -8 less than -3.5? It is, and it's less than 1. So my only job is to make sure that if I plug it into those equations, it's actually going to work. Object eraser, I like that. So let's plug in -8 here and -8 here. And I'll bring that down here, maybe. So I get the square root of -7. -2 times -8 is 16, is equal to the square root of 1 plus 8 is 9. So the square root of 9 is equal to the square root of 9. And I believe that that's true. So that works. Cool beans. Let's try something. Let's try number 23. It's a little tougher. little tougher, maybe just a little annoyinger. So the problem with this is we got two square roots, but we also have this pesky -2 at the front. So what that means is when we square it, we end up having to square this whole thing, which means to multiply it by itself. And so we don't get rid of that square root, but we do get rid of the one on the right. So on the right, we will have 3 minus 2v. Also, we know that 3 minus 2v has to be greater than or equal to 0. V has to be less than or equal to 3/2. And then from this one, we know -5 minus 2v greater than or equal to 0. V has to be less than or equal to 5/2. Well, if it's less than 3/2, it's got to be, if it's less than 3/2, it's got to be less than, hold on a second. Oh, it's -5/2, so sorry. You probably already knew that. It's got to be less than or equal to -5/2. If it's less than -5/2, it's got to be less than 3/2. So I don't care about this one, I care about this one. V less than or equal to -2.5. Make sure all my answers do that. All right, so if we multiply these things out, we'll do this. If you know how to do this, you can zip ahead to the next part. Or you're probably already done. Why do I not want those 5s to be negative? All right, we've got to FOIL. So we do this times this, and we get 4. We have to do this times this one. So a -2 times a negative square root is going to create a +2 square root of -5 minus 2v. And we're always going to end up with 2 of those terms. It's just a pattern that happens because you're squaring a binomial. So we add 2 square root of -5 minus 2v. And then plus, when you multiply those by themselves, you end up with -5 minus 2v. So -5 is going to be -1, because I'm going to distribute this basically. Minus 2v plus 4 of these square roots. Equals 3 minus 2v. I'm going to add the 1 and add the 2v to both sides. And I end up with something kind of nice happening. You're welcome. Equals 4. I'm going to divide by 4 on both sides and get 1. So I get the square root of -5 minus 2v has to equal 1. Square both sides. -5 minus 2v equals 1. V equals, add 5. 6 divided by 2 is -3. And that is less than -2.5. So as long as it works in here, it's my answer. 6, 1, -2 minus 1 is -3. 6, 3 minus, it doesn't work. So I'm going to say there's no solution to this one.